The American Observer covered an event at the New America Foundation, a nonprofit think tank in Washington, D.C. recently, on U.S. sales to foreign nations of military weapons. You'll soon see a presentation by Bill Hartung of the New American Foundation as he describes some of the recent developments in foreign military sales.
One of the things that has changed is just the volume of sales has increased dramatically in the last few years. $32 billion in foreign military sales by the United States in 2008. But there's a deal in the works for joint strike fighters to Israel that could be worth up to $15 billion. There's a THAAD anti-missile defense system, which has never been exported before, in the works to the UAE for about $9 billion. There's various combat helicopters and missile defense-related technologies to Taiwan that could be worth up to $7 billion. So in the last few months alone, there have been deals put on the table that would represent more than this recent $32 billion.
A Defense Department official who attended the New America Foundation event argued that these foreign military sales are in part a reaction to 9/11, in part because there's a belief that we need to cement our relationships with our current allies and to build relationships with new countries, particularly in the Middle East where conflicts can develop rapidly, such as in Lebanon.
One thing we haven't talked a whole lot about, I think, is the post-9/11 strategic dilemma, if you will. I do see, and I think many leaders on both sides of the aisle, if you will, perceive that that was kind of a strategic inflection point in our history, and that our focus needed to change a little bit in terms of how we view threats to this country. Like, for example, in Lebanon, I'll just one more half second. You have obviously a situation where the government of Iran is involved in providing support to Hezbollah. You have a situation where decision makers are intent on trying to preserve the efficacy or even the unitary nature, or the efficacy of the Lebanese armed forces or the internal security forces to mitigate Syrian influences, to mitigate Hezbollah's activities. And so if armaments are coming from other entities and organizations at a rather precipitous rate, the U.S. is kind of put in a position where it can either provide assistance with checks and balances and that sort of thing to sort of countervail that threat and to try to maintain the efficacy, the viability of a government or that sort of thing.
However, experts are concerned that as the U.S. funds weapons sales around the world and approves more weapons sales to unsavory regimes, some of these weapons may end up being used against either the U.S. or against populations within those countries, since some of these countries have regimes that have bad human rights records.
We looked at the top 25 U.S. arms recipients in the developing world, and then we looked at were they democracy, how did they rank in various human rights assessments, both the State Department and well-regarded NGOs like Human Rights Watch. And what we found is, even by a sort of conservative measure, giving countries the benefit of the doubt, more than half, 13 out of the 25 U.S. Recipients in the developing world, the top 25, were undemocratic regimes or major human rights abusers. And those included a lot of the Gulf monarchies, of course, places like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, included Egypt, included Colombia, included Pakistan,